Seated. Of course, we got Val coming all the way up from the front row again.
Thank you.
Children, you may be dismissed to Children's Church, sir.
All right. While I'm getting organized here, why don't you take a few minutes and say hello to the person next to you and just greet them to the service here today. And I will be organized here in a few seconds. And then we'll go from there. All right. Okay, good morning from up here to everyone down there. And I'll try to speak louder today because I guess I didn't last week. So we're going to begin with Scripture, as I always like to do. Let me get this thing going. I don't believe it is. Hang on. It should be on here, but I don't see it flashing. Oh, there it is. I got you. All right. It's buzzing. That means it's on. All right. So, wisdom is supreme. Therefore, get wisdom. And though it costs you all you have, get understanding. Psalm 4, verse 7. I love that psalm here because there's so many things we are exposed to, but we don't understand why we're exposed to it. Now, if you were here last month and you heard my testimony about what I went through with cancer and what God gave me in the radiation tube, you remember the fascination I had with all of the body wall charts that they have in these offices. And I was so amazed because my thoughts always went back to Jesus. And in Psalm 139, verse 4 through 5, it says, I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's wombs. And when you see all of the different parts of the human body and how they were knitted together, you can't help but not think about God. And of course it was helpful because you're sitting in there and waiting for 20 to 30 minutes till the doctor comes in and just to see what condition your condition is in, right? I love that song. So there's one item that affects everything that goes on in your body, and I want you to guess what it is. Does anybody know what it would be? Yes, I know you know. It's the blood. There's an average of 10 units of blood in, I would say, it counts for 8 to 10% of your body weight. And if you're a bigger person, you have more blood. A baby will have only 1 cup of blood. It's made up of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. And that makes up 45% of the volume, while the remaining 55% is liquid plasma. Now, I'm going to put a picture up here. And this over here is a part of an experiment. I'm not going to ask for volunteers. It's a simple experiment of taking, let's say, a glass of blood and watching it dissolve. You'll see the deepest reds are the red blood cells at the bottom. Plasma makes up a thin yellow, well, it's not thin, but it's the top part. And in the middle, you're going to see a gray band over here, which are the platelets and the white cells. They all congregate together. Now, I'm not going to be detailed to the point of boring you here, and you'll see on your handout, which I gave you for note-taking, you don't have to write all this stuff down. Just write down what is what leaps out at you about what I'm going to say. The platelets, these are the ones that prevent bleeding. They form clots in your system. It's basically, it controls your bleeding. A low platelet count, which is made in the bone marrow, as all of these are, is going to come from your bone marrow being damaged and unable to make enough. This can cause certain types of things like leukemia and other things. Symptoms of low platelets include being easily bleeding and unusual bleeding as well. Now, plasma, the liquid portion, which is up there on top, that's 92% water. And it contains 7% of these have albumin, gamma globulin, I remember this from chemistry class, and anti-hemophilic factors. And 1%, only 1%, has mineral salts, sugars, fats, hormones, and vitamins. Plasma is given commonly to trauma, burn, and shock patients, as well as keeping people that are suffering with severe liver disease and other multiple clotting factor deficiencies. The red blood cells are the most common. They're constantly being made. 1 drop of blood will have 1 billion cells in it. And that's what gives blood the red color that we have. And it carries oxygen to the other parts of the body and the other organs. A low red blood count, some of these are tongue twisters, you can get anemia, which is what I suffer from. It has things like you're going to have fatigue, you're going to have shortness of breath, dizziness, and other things that complicate the flow of the blood. And you have to eat foods rich in iron and all that stuff. I've gotten to know that pretty well. The white blood cells are the shortest living. They are from 1 to 3 days, but they're very important because they defend against infections. There's a thing called granulocytes, and they're the most common type of white blood cell. They are the ones that protect against infection. Now, this is just a brief summary of blood, and I wanted to review that because it is the way God made us to stay healthy. What makes us sick are things that additionally we put into our bodies, like what we choose to eat, what we choose to drink, illicit drugs, alcohol, smoking, things like that. They affect the health of the body. So you wonder, after you've gone through some of these medical tests, why would you want to complicate the flow of blood by taking all the rest of that stuff? Of course, our choices in those things are just one of the problems. Our environment is another problem that messes up our blood thing. And you can think about what happened 3 years ago now when the deadly disease, COVID, came about, and other various forms of cancer. So in summary for this section here, blood supplies the fuel to our organs, all of the organs, and also removes the waste product so that I guess it's like an efficient highway to take oxygen in and remove hazardous waste through the capillaries. It's very fascinating, but I want to do a little experiment here now because this is very important. And I'm going to ask for a volunteer for this experiment. My volunteer is over here, but she's not coming up, so would you come up here, please, young lady? All right, what we're going to do here is have her sit on this chair here, and I'm going to give her a blood pressure test. Now, this is what I have to do every day.
Not with me.
Here, we put this up here. This is a home model right here. We're going to slip this thing here on her left arm, and then I'm going to explain to you what's happening. I'm sure a lot of you have had this done in doctor's offices. They even have these machines at Walmart, any of these grocery stores, to take your blood pressure. So I'm going to start it. And what's going to happen here, you'll hear this buzz. Right now, what's happening through this arm is a stoppage of the blood that is supposed to flow, and we'll just wait till that's done here while I explain it. It's going to give me a reading, which I'm going to put up there. That is the blood pressure chart for normal and then high blood pressure. You can scan that as this thing goes down. Are you a football fan? I bet you your blood pressure was up and down at the game last night, right?
Yes. They were bad.
Okay. And last year, the blood pressure went up and down as well. But that's the way we're functioning here. So, all right. I can see that you're still thinking about the game last night. So we'll take this off. She's not in the normal section here, but then she never was. So thank you, young lady, and you can shut that off for me. This is my wife, actually, my wife. We practice this, and sometimes it goes, sometimes it doesn't. So you can see that the blood pressure, the flap there, which I can't remember what it's called, but it tightens and it stops the toxins, the flow, and the toxins build up in there. And this is the situation with our own bodies. The pain came. Did you get pain? Yes. You got pain. Okay, the pain came because you forced the muscles to keep working while the blood supply to your arm was shut off. Now, here's another thing. If you were to have that on your arm here and started flexing your hand like this maybe 10 times, or you started using it to hammer something or cut a piece of paper with scissors, it would be uncomfortable, but at one point it would be so painful you would cry out in agony because there's no blood flushing out the impurities in your blood. It's an amazing thing. Let me go to this one here. You can see up there, it's the high number on this was, it's called the systolic number. It's a heart muscle contracts and pumps blood from the heart chamber into the arteries. Dystolic is supposed to be diastolic. Okay, that's misspelled. It's a low number, and it's the heart muscle relaxes and allows the heart chamber to refill with blood. You don't have to write all that down here. I just have it on your sheet here to give you an indication of what these terms mean. All right, now, the reason I bring this out here and had the example here, she was feeling the same thing Jesus was feeling during all of his, how can you call it anything but toxic pain, through his suffering. His blood pressure must have been up a lot higher than that. You know, we think about it as we, just as, let me put it this way. Just as blood cleanses the body of harmful metabolites, forgiveness through Christ's blood cleanses away the waste products in our lives, which is sin. And that impedes our true health and are a blockage to our relationship with each other and with God. You know, we tend to think of sin as being a private list of grievances that upsets God the Father. And in the Old Testament, you can actually remember, as you read it and some of the stories in here, that sin was such a blockage, a paralyzing toxin that reflected not only disobedience, but harmful pain that they had to go through because of their sins. So sin is a separation. Things like pride, lust, egotism, covetousness that are all mentioned in the Old Testament. The more we cling to what they went through when we went through this ourselves, we go through this ourselves almost on a daily basis if we're not careful. So how do songs like the ones we just sang, relate to the cleansing power of blood? And this is where I wanted to get to. And we'll get this one out of here and go back to, well, we'll go to that in a minute. Go back to this. Okay, Jesus was a carpenter, right? He was about 5'5", according to what people say or have investigated. 5'5", about 120 pounds. Had strong muscles. He had no disease, no arthritis, no diabetes. He had no heart problems. But wait. Let's stop right here and reflect. Scripture says that Jesus had to experience all of the struggles and the suffering of mankind. That's in Hebrews 2:14 through 18. You don't have to write that one down. And that he would bear our physical sicknesses and pain. And now we'll get to the scripture. Yet it was our weaknesses he carried. It was our sorrows that weighed him down. And we thought his troubles were a punishment from God, a punishment for his own sins. In verse 5 it says, "But he was pierced for our rebellion, crushed for our sins. He was beaten so we could be whole. He was whipped so we could be healed." He only lived for 33 years. So how could he have experienced all of those things that relate to our sorrow? It says that Jesus was a man of sorrows. He was wrongly accused. He was betrayed. He was forsaken, spat upon, slandered, mocked openly. But in Matthew 26:37, you'll see what he said to Peter, James, and John. "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death." He was very sorrowful and he was very heavy because of what others were experiencing. And when he was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, this is important, he became so sorrowful that he experienced the condition of hematodrosis. That's the condition where the capillary blood vessels that feed the sweat glands rupture under physical and emotional stress. This was the very first time he shed blood. It wasn't on the cross. It was on his way to the cross. But this was the first time blood flowed from Jesus' brow. His disciples had fallen asleep. He was taking all of this on alone. About the sins that he was carrying to the cross. And on the sheet, if you're taking notes here, that would be the first thing you want to put in under shed blood. It's a long word, scientific word, but it's one to remember. So, just to conclude on that point, at that moment, because Jesus, who was the image of God in the flesh, and as the God of mercy, he was experiencing the consequences of all of the sins of mankind. Now, I want to flip over to something that might seem unrelated. But while I was studying this, I believe the Lord opened my mind to this because I hadn't seen this before. It made me stop and examine myself in preparation for what Jesus had to do to give up his life and to give it to sacrifice it for us. In Ephesians 6:14, the Apostle Paul writes about the armor of God. At the time he wrote this, he was in prison, chained to a Roman guard. As this guard was his constant companion, he used the armor that the guard was wearing as the example of what the armor of God is like. We're going to read that verse in 6:14, and I believe the last part of your notes you'll see the word, you can write one word. Stand firm then, with the belt of truth buckled around your waist, with the breastplate of righteousness in place, and with your feet fitted with the readiness that comes from the gospel of peace. In addition to this, take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming arrows of the evil one. Take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God. And pray in the Spirit on all occasions with all kinds of prayers and requests. And with this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying for all the saints. Now consider this. Jesus was led to the cross. The soldiers placed a crown of thorns on his head. And I considered myself in this. And this is the second point that you can put under there. His crown of thorns was the second place where he shed blood. As the blood was leaking from his skull, was he paying the punishment at that time for all of my evil thoughts, my impure and selfish plans, my pride, my unholy moments that were disastrous, when I could have turned them into holy moments, when I should have been wearing the helmet of salvation with the mind of Christ attached to it to protect me from unholy thoughts that are birthed in the mind. Now, as the soldiers beat him, mocked him, spit at him, was he at that time paying or atoning for my runaway emotions, my anger, my frustrations, my doubts, when I should have been wearing the breastplate of righteousness as my defense against evil, carrying, studying, and wielding the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, standing strong with the shield of faith. As he hung on the cross, as the crowds taunted him and the soldiers railed against him, were the hideous lies, the gossip, the hurtful accusations, the unforgivenesses I ignored being atoned for at that time, instead of gearing up and buckling on the belt of truth, tightly guarding against speech that hurts others instead of helping them. Alas, and did my Savior bleed, the old hymn goes. Again on the cross, Jesus struggled to say, I thirst. And they offered him a sponge of vinegar. Was that the payment for all the words carelessly spoken, the cursing, the unkind remarks that were carelessly flung out of an unguarded tongue? And finally, did he bleed from his hands and feet when they fastened 7 to 10 inch nails to the feet that were crossed at 90 degrees? Was that to pay for my running to people and places where I shouldn't have been? Or gone to places I selfishly considered more important than what my readiness and character as a Christian should have been? Where I was easily seduced by the attractions of this world. To summarize the 3 stages. Well, it's misspelled up there, but I'm sure you got it before. Hematidrosis, crown of thorns, and the nailing of the hands and feet is Christ shed blood in stages. So we're almost done, but I want to read to you, if there was a coroner alive at that time, this is what his report might have sounded like. And I'm just going to read it. The once perfectly crafted body of the subject was severely weakened by excessive scourging and stabbings, with internal damage to the bones and severed nerves of the external extremities, which were stretched to a minimum of 6 inches longer than their original length. This interfered with normal breathing patterns. Normally, to breathe in, the diaphragm, which is the large muscle separating the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity, must move down. This enlarges the chest cavity and air automatically moves into the lungs. To exhale, the diaphragm rises up, which compresses the air in the lungs and forces the air out. And as the victim hangs on the cross, the weight of his body pulls down on the diaphragm and the air moves into his lungs and remains there. He must then push up on his nailed feet to exhale. Carbon dioxide builds up in the blood because of the difficulty in exhaling. Carbonic acid floats in the blood. At the same time, the heart beats faster to circulate available oxygen. The decreased oxygen causes damage to the tissues. The capillaries begin leaking watery fluid from the blood into the tissues. This results in a buildup of fluid around the heart and the lungs. The collapsing lungs, failing heart, dehydration, and the inability to get sufficient oxygen to the tissues essentially suffocates the victim. The decreased oxygen also damages the heart itself, which leads to cardiac arrest. In severe cases of cardiac stress, the heart can even burst, a process known as cardiac rupture. Conclusion: cause of death of Jesus of Nazareth, heart attack. So now we're going to take up the elements, if you'll take the elements, and reflect on what the shed blood of Christ really means and why we do this in remembrance of him. The word repentance, one more point, describes the process each cell in the body undergoes in the cleansing action. In repentance, each cell willingly avails itself of the cleansing action of blood. Repentance is for our sakes, not to punish us, but to free us from the harmful effects of accumulated sins. That word accumulated is very important. This is the body broken for you, for your gossiping, your lust, your pride, your insensitivity, broken to remove all those and replace them with perfect obedience. Christ has given us the wine and the bread as proof that we are forgiven, healed, and loved. The symbol works its way inside us, becoming material as well as spiritual, carrying its message to individual cells. We are all cells in this body of Christ. If sin is the great separator, Christ is the great reconciler. He dissolves the memory or membrane of separation. So after realizing what the ceremony means as we go through it, I just want to point out one other thing, that there's another commitment ceremony called baptism. And our tank over there has been lying in there for a little bit of a while. So if you're ready to take that final step, which is the outward expression of your commitment to Christ. See us afterwards, the leadership. On the night he was betrayed, he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." We take the element. In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it, in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." Let us take the cup. And we'll have one more song before closing. I hope you were blessed by the message, and keep the helmet of salvation on your head and just focus on that picture right there. Be strong in the Lord. Ephesians 6. So let's sing our final song, if she's there. If not, there she goes.